Hello, I'm Andy Agathangelou, the founder of the Transparency Task Force. The Transparency Task Force is a certified social enterprise. We exist because we are looking to change the way the financial industry works. Our mission is to promote ongoing reform of the financial services sector so that it serves society better. We've been around for about 6 years. We've grown quickly. There's a lot of interest in the world about reform of the financial industry. We've gone from a standing start with just me in it to a community of about 4,000 people around the world who have varying degrees of involvement with our work, some just a little and others a great deal. I'm going to spend a few moments telling you a bit more about the Transparency Task Force, just so that you've got the context for the type of organisation that we are and what we're all about. Essentially, what we do is we organise individuals to work collaboratively within different groups. The screen you're looking at right now is what we call our groups page. There's a long list of groups here. They cover a broad range of topics. As you can see, they include areas such as banks and building societies, complementary currencies, financial planning, females for fairer finance, financial stability, a project called the Global Financial Services Oaths, foreign exchange and payments, governance, culture and conduct, investments, pensions, so on and so forth. There's also one called Regulators Watch. We've been becoming increasingly interested in the effectiveness or otherwise of the financial regulators around the world. We think that's a particularly interesting topic. We've also got another group called Scam Busters, which is made up mostly, unfortunately, of victims of different kinds of financial scams. All of our groups operate under a principle, a belief, if you like, and that belief is articulated so very, very well by this rather famous quotation by Margaret Mead. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. And we believe that absolutely. We really do believe that people working together, people battling together, in fact, can make a real difference. So that's what we're all about. And this idea of changing things is central to our work. The Transparency Task Force most definitely isn't simply some kind of a talking shop. If all we did was talk about issues, believe you me, I'd pack it up tomorrow morning and I'd go and do something that earned me a lot more money than what I do now. The reason I do what I do is because our experience over the last 6 years has made me believe absolutely that if you organize and mobilize and strategize properly, you really can make a difference. We call this our strategy for driving change, which we characterize as follows. Our strategy for driving change is all about bringing together two types of people. On one hand, there are those that we describe as having a sense of passion and purpose for the change that we want to see. I'm sure many people on this meeting today have that sense of passion and purpose for the change that we want to see. And the other group are those that we characterize as having the power and the position to make change possible. And within that group, we think about people or types of people such as regulators, policymakers, politicians, and we spend a significant amount of our time liaising with regulators, politicians, policymakers, and so on to influence their thinking. We've had some real successes. For example, we've created two all-party parliamentary groups, one on pension scams and one on personal banking and fairer financial services. We've also created the opening of an inquiry on pension scams. So I think there's sufficient evidence to suggest that the Transparency Task Force community as a whole, it has reason to be recognised as a force for good when it comes to reforming the financial services sector. It's early days, we're only 6 years old, but we've got a pretty bright future ahead of us. Central to everything we do is the idea of community and collaboration and people working together. And that's really very, very important to us. Page I'm showing you now, he says, I'm about to show you now, is what we call our TTF, that's Transparency Task Force International Initiative. The background to this is that in 2019, we, the TTF, organised and ran meetings physically in Dublin and Amsterdam, Zurich, Brussels, Hong Kong, Singapore, Sydney and Melbourne, Washington, DC, 2 meetings in Boston and 2 meetings in New York. And the net result of that, ladies and gentlemen, is that we were able to internationalize the Transparency Task Force. We're very proud of that. So we have approximately 1,000 or so members who are outside the UK. And I mention this partly for a reason. We have people from all over the world today, which is really great to see. What this means is we have several international communities. So for example, we have what we call TTF USA, TTF Asia. TTF Asia is mostly, it's about 45% Hong Kong, 45% Singapore, and some people in India and other parts of Asia. TTF Europe, TTF Australia. In fact, we resonate very strongly in Australia. The reason for that is that, as you may know, there's been a very big and significant and forensic analysis of the financial sector in Australia over the last few years, something called the Hayne Commission, Hayne. And what that means is the Australians really do identify very well with our calls for greater transparency, truthfulness, and trustworthiness in the financial industry. Canada's significant, but quite small. South Africa is really just getting off the ground. In fact, we're going to be turning TTF South Africa into TTF Africa. We've got people in other parts of the continent getting interested in what we're doing as well. So I hope that gives everybody a bit of a feel. The way that things will work in terms of process is that my colleague Alexandra, our head of events, who sadly is going on maternity leave on Friday, not quite sure how we're going to cope, but Alexandra will email you all tomorrow, make sure that you get invited to join whichever ones of the groups that you might want to join. And I really do hope that you find the TTF community a very good extension of the community that you're already a part of with and through Barry. Talking about Barry, hats off to Barry. This event would definitely not be happening at all if it wasn't for Barry. Barry's the inspiration behind it. We've got to know Barry pretty well over the last few months, and he's been an absolute pleasure to work with. We'd love to work with him again in the future. There's wonderful alignment between the Transparency Task Force worldview and also Barry's. So I think there's a great kind of partnership relationship developing there. Not only is the fact that we're running the event down to Barry, also the fact that we're running it now is down to Barry as well. The reason for that is because Barry sensed the degree of urgency about getting this message out there. Originally, I was thinking we'd run it in October, maybe November, but Barry said, no, there's real reason why we've got to alert people to what's going on and make everybody aware. And as a result of that, we've somehow managed to find a space in our pretty busy schedule to get this event happening. Really pleased to be working with you, Barry. Barry's going to be doing a lot of the work tonight, which is great. I can pretty much sit back and listen for most of it. I'll just repeat a couple of things, particularly for those who have joined a little bit late. We are recording the session. We will be turning this into a video that will be posted online so people can watch it. When you get told about the link to the video, of course, watch it yourselves if you want to, but perhaps more importantly, spread the word. You know, social media is our friend. It's how we can connect with people around the world and help to spread the kind of message that we are talking about tonight. I see there's a couple of well done Barrys, and I'll second that in the chat already. Talking about the chat, my final point before I pass over to Mr. Barry James, is please do use the chat to share your thoughts and ideas, contact details if you want, LinkedIn profiles if you want, whatever you like. But of course, I'm sure everybody understands we are a collegiate and civilized and constructive organization. So be sensible and intelligent about what you share. Everything that goes into the chat will be shared in the notes that get circulated tomorrow, as well as the slides, etc., etc. I think I've covered everything I need to talk about. Really pleased you're all here. Extremely pleased that we're running this event. Thank you again, Barry. Barry, over to you. I'll leave it to you to pick up from here. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. So first of all, let me add my own welcome to. It's great to see so many familiar faces from around the world and some new ones as well. I'm guessing they're mostly from the TTF community, and it's brilliant to be here. And I'm genuinely very grateful to Andy for responding to the urgency, and there is urgency for this. and we'll explain why as we go through. But I'm really very grateful that they put stops and made this happen this side of the summer break. We're going to be taking a bit of a trip into the future. Normally, with the Transparency Task Force, which, by the way, has come as a great revelation to me. I've long spent 10 years, looking at our regulator and helped make some changes, the way that regulation works in the UK, which has been copied elsewhere around the world. And one of the big weaknesses that we have generally is the failure, who guards the guards? The failure for there to be any scrutiny of regulators and lots of other institutions as well. And we'll see that reflected tonight. And as I say, a revelation to find the Transparency Task Force who've, moved and done already such great work. So I heartily recommend looking into that as well. So as I say, we're going to be forward-looking this evening, and we're going to be sort of talking about something that's happening very quietly now, that will be common knowledge within a year or so, and a big part and forming the world that we're living in within 4 or 5 years. And I say that with complete confidence. And that might seem a little strange because hardly anyone's talking about this at the moment. Hardly anyone's talking about what comes after, and that's what we're talking about, what comes after cryptocurrencies. It's not covered in the press. The press, by and large, don't understand it. I think it's true to say that almost all the our legislators don't understand it yet. But that's going to change fairly rapidly and propel us forward into some uncharted waters that we need to give real thought to. So, as I say, outside the world's central banks and specialists in the field, most people remain unaware of, here they are, here's the central banks, this is the Fed, of course, the Bank of England, and the European Central Bank. And there's feverish activity there. They are under pressure over this. They're coordinating right around the world. So we'll touch on this later, but almost all the central banks, over 80%, 86% according to the Bank of International Settlements, who's coordinating all of this, are engaged at one stage or another in remaking money. What do I mean by that? Do I mean adopting cryptocurrencies? No, I don't. I mean the next thing that's coming along. And what this means is that actually decisions are being made right now. They're certainly being formed now and will be made over the next few months, hence the urgency. And there's decisions that will affect the way the financial system and basically everything will work for generations to come. I'm not the only person who recognizes this and is saying this. There's more. But what's clear is that as a society, increasingly clear from the work we've done with humane economics, which led to this project, the Remaking Money project, that if we stay on the road we're on, we're in trouble. And there's a fork in the road here. If we make it, it's not going to happen of its own accord. And one of the paths leads to increasingly dangerous territory, nationally and globally. And the other one is considerably better, which we'll go into. And with the hope of at least minimizing the systematic damage that we're currently doing to the people on the planet. That slide is to tell you and just make it absolutely clear that I'm not talking about Bitcoin or any of the other cryptocurrencies. What I'm talking about is money as we know it, becoming digital. So the pound, the dollar, the euro, and so on. And the massive implications of that in itself, but even more so of the designs that are being made. And as I alluded to earlier on, this is happening not just in the UK, it is happening in the UK. About 2 months ago, we announced on the same day the launch of our project, because we were already aware of this. I've been talking about it for a couple of years, that it was coming. But about two months ago, the Bank of England launched its a new department for this, and a joint task force with the Treasury on, they're called CBDCs. It's the central bank digital currencies you can see here, often called CBDCs, not an exactly friendly or name. The press here promptly offered the word Britcoin for ours, which was sort of taken up by Rishi Sunak. A little unhelpful because it makes people think of Bitcoin. And as I say, this is a different animal altogether. But this is the G20 report that, as you can see, just came out at the end of last month to the G20 and in public, saying that, you know, we're moving forward, in essence. So what we're talking about, I just want to emphasize here, is the digital pound, the digital euro, the digital dollar, and the equivalents all around the world and the implications of that. And as I say, this has barely been discussed. There's barely been any debate. In fact, other than those that I've hosted at FinTech Week a couple of years ago, and in between, I don't know of any other real debates on the public and citizens aspect of this. And this is the first, as far as I know, economist to spontaneously, without me prodding them, write about the subject, John Adams from Australia, who is rightly pointing to, well, you can see the headline there, the potential Orwellian horror of central bank digital currencies because of the nature and power of the tools that they place in the hands of those who are running them. The issue we want to raise here is this is de facto now very clearly the advent of the internet of money. This is the next stage. I don't think this can really be any doubt of the development, the next phase of the internet and the web. And it's the internet and the web meet money. And it's likely to be at least as disruptive as the first time around. And my judgment is it'll be even more so. I believe it'll be even more disruptive. I think we've got another opportunity this time where we were taken rather unawares, first by the PC and computer revolution, and certainly by the web revolution. We really didn't get our heads around the implications for society, and we're suffering from that now, as Tim Berners-Lee is very happy to talk about. But we should be aware this time. It's absolutely essential that we're aware this time, because there are key questions for now. So who will design this new money and the internet of money? Who will control it? Who will own our monetary system going forward? Who will oversee our monetary system? And over all of that, who will decide those things? And the truth of the matter is that at the moment, those decisions are in the hands of bankers, commercial bankers, and central bankers. They are the people who are doing the work on this. They are the people almost unscrutinized doing the work on this and moving at speed. And if ever there was a need for scrutiny, well, perhaps this is it. But certainly that's kind of where we stand at the moment. So I think it's fair to say that the generation of bankers that gave us 2008, that gave us GRG, that gave us many of the things that Andy referred to earlier on, which are systemically based, are the ones who will, given the opportunity, and the opportunity is there before them, there is nothing to say right now, given the opportunity, will use this to to deepen and strengthen the already massive hold that they already have on the financial system, which we'll talk about. And I'm delighted that Simon Youel is from Positive Money is with us, because there's some surprising things about the system as it is now. Actually, I mean, what this will do is shine a light on where we're going and where we are, but also where you know, how we got here, as well as where we are, and there's some surprising things about that in terms of the entrenched power and entanglement in the money system of those who are there for their personal gain. That all sounds extraordinarily grim, I know. And this isn't just to lighten the mood, but actually this is the point for this evening. We're called, said Buckminster Fuller, to be architects of our future, not its victims. Andy referenced Margaret Mead earlier on, and you know, that quote about the only thing that really has made change is a small group of committed people. Well, I'd really rather have a very large group of equally committed people, but that's not often not the way it works. But we do need to know about this as people, because this is the first time in the history of civilization, and that within the context of a democracy, we have the opportunity and the imperative, because it's not going to go away, it's going to happen, to remake and rethink and redesign money and the way it works. And the question I'm going to pose and come back to through the next hour or so, along with some of the stellar world level sort of speakers who are going to come in via video and more directly, is that we have the opportunity to do this differently. We have the opportunity to do it better. We have the opportunity to for this to be a system which is owned by the people, for the benefit of the people, with proper scrutiny and proper transparency. We are at a change inflection point. And I want to ask the question, and I want all your questions later on, please, as well as Simon, I'm sure, will be happy to take questions. What your question, but the question I want to ask is, in a democracy, given the choice, wouldn't just about everyone want to choose that, rather than the system which is pretty much run for the benefit of an elite? And I don't mean the government, I mean the financial system, the banks and so on. So we're called to be architects of our future, not its victims. Just to reinforce the fact this is crucial for our future. It is going to live for generations. It really is important. And it's important because of, it goes to and is at the root of, in many ways, what we're doing to the planet. I believe through the research that we've done at Humane Economics into the systemic thinking and the decision making that flows from the economic models that are now discredited, yet we still carry on using them, that they are very clearly, to me, at the root, not just of climate change and the fact that we are dicing with death, playing with fire, playing with the potential for a kind of random, economically driven genocide. I was in a room full of business leaders, some really top level business leaders a few days ago, and they were talking in really clear terms about the coming problems, the coming issues in terms of displacement of people, in terms of what amounts to a small, potentially even only a small portion of the human race being able to survive what we've done to the planet. There's certainly need for change of direction, but also economic justice. From the same root, we have a system where until relatively recently, each generation was doing better than the last. That's gone into reverse, and vast numbers of people, probably the majority now, live in financial pain. These things flow from the same root and are difficult to deal with because of those entrenched interests. And here's an opportunity to do something about that. So let's talk about the advent of the Internet of Money. So what do we mean by that? And what's this about the silken cloud? So on the left here is a map that came recently from the Bank of International Settlements, mapping the stage of development of countries and central banks around the world on CBDCs, and it's actually accelerated since then. On the right, there's a map of China's Belt and Road project, One Belt, One Road, they call it, which is a revival of the ancient Silk Road trade routes. And as some people will know, about 10 years ago, a little under, about 10 years ago, Xi Jinping, when he came to power, created the plan for the modern Belt Road, and have been acquiring ports and other assets around the world in order to have a greater impact on world trade. And the Silken Cloud is an extension of that. For the last 6 years, probably nearer 10 years, but we certainly know about 6 years, the Chinese have been working on their own digital currency, which is now being rolled out in 11 regions within China in test mode. They're incredibly serious about this. But not just that, they've created a cloud service for the world. So it's not just a currency. The currency is available and will be available to the world, and certainly initially to the Belt and Road countries, of which there are, I think, 38, if my memory serves correctly. But you should think of this as something beyond that. So the best place to start is if you think of Amazon for the world, but next generation, or probably the one after that. That's what China have been working on. So if you ask the central banks and listen to what they're saying at the moment, they'll tell you very implausibly, they use the same story and the same metaphors because they're coordinating completely. That this is because of the need to keep up with technological change, and the thinking about equality and so on. Those things were all true a year, 2 years ago, at the time of Libra 2 years ago. What's made the change is the realization, which has only really come about around about the end of last year and the beginning of this, of what is happening in China, and that the depth and strength of what they're doing. This book is written by Richard Turin, who lives in, I think, China or Hong Kong, I think, but is intimately familiar with not just with the payment systems, but with actually what's going on and all that. And this has only recently become apparent. And we've had Christine Lagarde from the IMF. Well, I think she's ECB now, actually, a European Central Bank, talking of a timescale of less than 5 years. Less than 5 years, unprecedented in this sort of way, to implement the digital euro. When the interviewer asked her, well, won't this be after the time? No. This will be during my term. So you've heard the outline of the story from me. Fortunately, it's not just me. We have, as I said, a stellar lineup. Simon Youel you see there is with us, and we'll be talking about both the situation we're now in and the way that money works at the moment, and the problems with that we really badly now need to address, and perhaps why as well. But first, I'm going to, all of these videos have been recorded specifically for this evening, by the way, and I'm very grateful to the people involved. That one's worth pausing on for a moment, because it's what we're about: who will design the Internet of Money, who will own it, and so on, and who will oversee it, who will decide. Oh, and finally, before we move into the next section, I just want to mention that we are serious about bringing people together to help them and to together help to navigate this. So everyone this evening is invited to use this URL here to join a navigation group. We're also announcing this evening that shortly we'll be opening a new program to help equip leaders, community leaders, legislators, business leaders, and citizens with the information and insights, knowledge, and skills that they need to help navigate what are uncharted waters. So Dr. Jane Thomason is one of my co-founders of the British Blockchain and Frontier Technologies Association, but she's well known in UN circles and OECD circles, and has worked internationally for many years. And this is what she's got to say.
Hi everyone, my name's Jane Thomason, and for many years now I've been a proponent around blockchain and social impact and the change that we have real potential to make in the world today, because this really is a unique moment in human history, because we now have the tools between technology and mobile to be able to connect the vast majority of people on the planet to economic and other circumstances. So that's why this conversation today about the future of the economic system and the future of money is so important, because we are at a time in human history different than ever before. You know, way back in the first industrial revolution, you needed to open a factory to participate. In the fifth industrial revolution, all you need is a mobile phone. For many thousands of years before the first industrial revolution, economic growth was practically negligible, generally tracking with population growth. Farmers grew a bit more food and blacksmiths made a few more tools. But when steam power and industrial machinery came along in the 18th century, economic activity took off. Now, with exponential digital growth, we are on the verge of a fifth industrial revolution, a new socioeconomic era creating infinite opportunities for humanity and for a better planet. We know that blockchain-based payment systems can bring more than 1.7 billion people who are unbanked or underbanked into the economy using technology and mobile. 70% of the world's population have access to mobile, and it's growing. We know that the economic system that we have relied on since World War II is broken. We have seen through COVID, now being called a pandemic of inequality, how we failed to serve the poor and look after the needs of the planet. We now know that there is an opportunity with central bank digital currencies and programmable money to do something to build a new economic system that is better than the one we have had. We can have faster, cheaper, more efficient payments. That could lead to reduced interest rates and increasing investment to drive macroeconomic growth. CBDCs can help reduce wealth inequality. For example, access to banking services for adults in sub-Saharan Africa has increased by 19% since 2000 to 36%, but that's still half the average for other low-income countries. And often it's women are the ones who are living in extreme poverty and marginalised communities that remain excluded. Digital currencies also offer opportunity to send money directly to refugees through cash transfers. It can reduce the cost of remittances significantly, ensuring more money gets in the hands of those who need it. It can also help reduce the gender gap in financial resources. Digital currencies can offer the chance to bring women into the economic system through employment and building businesses more easily and safely. Digital currency can be programmed so it can be spent only for a designated purpose. In supply chains, programmable money promises the instantaneous delivery of payment upon the delivery of a product. It's extraordinary opportunity, but there's also a downside. All of this assumes benevolent government and institutions, but digital money creates the potential to install totalitarian control systems, enabling the monitoring of all economic and financial transactions, use of this data that's been collected for law enforcement, the targeting of political enemies, and for silencing political dissidents, implementation of social management tools such as social credit scores, imposing financial penalties or constraints for citizens who engage in activities that are disapproved by government. It can direct capital into asset classes preferred by policymaker, or divert capital from asset classes they disapprove, and can compel people to consume particular goods and services preferred by policymakers. We need to make sure that it's done right so we don't see these negative consequences. So how do we do that? We cannot run a science experiment on the world, and least of all on vulnerable people. We have learnt, though, like standardising global messaging platforms, which has broadened the base of connectivity by billions of users, that the opportunity of compliant blockchain-based networks can extend the perimeter of the formal economy and lower the bottom rung of economic mobility, thus completing the financial system and giving access to the people at the bottom of the pyramid. Solutions and technologies need to be open source. Traditionally, there's been a lack of competition for basic services, but now the pandemic has made the utility of this kind of system clear, not just for international payments, but for domestic financial health. We've learned during the pandemic how quickly people will accept new technologies, teaching millions of students via Zoom. And how many panels did we all go on? The case for open blockchain-based payment mechanisms and the stable coins or the future CBDCs they carry has become of age. The question for us is, how do we build a system that supports sustainable development, connecting people, connecting the economy, and connecting the planet, and how impact-focused blockchain initiatives can participate in building a new regenerative economy post-COVID. We need not be afraid of the future, for the future is in our hands. But the question is, what are we going to do with it?
So it was some really very important messages there from Dr. Jane Thomason. Hardly need much reinforcement, but I think she was alluding there, and it's worth just mentioning that not only, you know, are we depending on what we do next, going to entrench potentially for generations, if not forever, these privileges and including the privilege of money creation, which has been captured by the commercial banks over the last 40 or so years, virtually untrammeled, which has given them immense power, the power to defy government. We've seen this again and again through work that we've done, including through the COVID emergency. But, you know, power, again, Jane alluded to, you know, the social scoring system in China. This is a tool. It's difficult to conceive of anything. It's certainly beyond the nightmares or dreams of George Orwell in terms of its ability to micromanage, control, programmable money, able to micromanage, control small populations and steer them and reward or punish them. I'm going to ask Simon Youel to step up in a moment or two from Positive Money, who've campaigned long and hard. This is a quote that someone sent me very recently. I've been aware of for a while. That I'm sure some of the things that Simon will be saying will at least allude to this. But it was Henry Ford that said it's well enough that the people of the nation don't understand our banking and monetary system. And he might have said how entangled they've become, and it's much worse now. Because if they did, I believe there'd be a revolution before tomorrow morning. I think it was Ed, who's with us this evening, asked, you know, what I'm suggesting and what's the message this evening? Do we need to move to the barricades? Well, I will come to that later. But Henry Ford was sort of talking along the similar lines. So at that point, I'm going to invite Simon to come in person. He's in the same time zone, unlike Jane, who's in Australia, probably asleep right now.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Barry, for having me, and thanks everyone for attending. This is really great talk, and it's really encouraging to see so many people spend a lovely July summer evening talking about this topic, because it's often seen as quite a dry topic. But you know, as Barry said, it's quite crucial to understanding the future, not only of the money and financial system, but potentially the wider economy and society. So just to introduce Positive Money briefly. So we're a non-profit research and campaign group working towards a money and banking system which supports a fairer, more democratic and sustainable economy. But I'd like to briefly, as Barry's alluded to, explain the current system and then potentially sketch out a positive vision for how a CBDC could enable a better future or a better system than the one we have now. So yeah, to start, I think, you know, the key thing to be thinking about is, you know, the kind of difference between public money and private money, because lots of people, you know, when you tell them about a digital currency, they'll assume that we already have one. You know, the bank deposits, you know, the money in their bank account, the electronic numbers on their screen is already a form of digital money. But the key kind of distinction to get across is, you know, who essentially owns and controls this money supply. And, you know, what we've currently done, I will argue, is we've privatized and, you know, given power over the monetary system to the banking system, because the only form of public money currently accessible to me and you is notes and coins. And we know that the Bank of England are the people who make these. And if you try making your own, you'll get a lovely call from a special branch very early in the morning. So these notes and coins are public money, you know, issued by the Bank of England, but they only make up 3% of the money supply, potentially less now, because we've seen, especially with the acceleration of a war on cash under COVID, you know, people are being dissuaded from using cash, despite the scientific evidence overwhelmingly showing that cash is no more dangerous, perhaps in some ways more safe than credit cards and card payments and other alternatives. So that's about 3% of the money in the economy. So if we think about the rest of the 97%, This exists on, as the money in our bank accounts, on the balance sheets of commercial banks. And this money, as the Bank of England revealed definitively in 2014, is created by commercial banks in the act of lending. So banks are often assumed to be taking our money and then redistributing it, lending it to someone else. But actually, as the Bank of England explains, what they do in the act of lending is create new purchasing power. They're not lending out existing funds. And so while lots of people have this idea of there being like a standard amount of money created by the government, something to do with the gold standard often, the amount of money in the economy and where it goes is essentially created and controlled by the private banking system. And, they misuse this privilege and have for decades. So the vast majority of money created by banks doesn't actually go to the real economy, like businesses and things which, create jobs, produce things, but rather most of about 80% of the money goes to essentially bidding up asset prices. So banks create money to create mortgages, to buy up other financial assets, and essentially, only increase asset prices, but not actually really contribute much to economic activity. So that leads to huge inequality. So currently, under this system, the main way in which, if we want to get new money into the banking system, into the economy, we have to do it via the banking system. And so that means essentially the main way we've created new money and expanded the money supply has been through the creation of debt. So things like mortgages and getting households and businesses into more debt in order to stimulate the economy. And, we've seen the failures of this kind of relying on bank lending and kind of a debt asset price fueled economic policy over the last 40 years or longer. And, it leads to instability. Essentially, as we rely on banks to create all the money in the economy and then to make payments as well, we're kind of held hostage to the banking system in that the banks are able to continue bidding up asset prices and making loans, and regardless of the risk, they will need to be bailed out by the central bank and government, because they are too big to fail, because we rely on them not only to inject money into the economy for the most part, but also, to make payments. So you may remember in 2008, the big risk there, the reason the banks had to be bailed out was because if they hadn't been, there wouldn't have been money to release from the cash machines. People wouldn't have been able to make electronic payments. And essentially, we are kind of in this hostile relationship with the banking system, where we rely on it for the economy, and we have to continue to bail it out. So I'd like to talk more about the war on cash. I'm not sure how much time I have, but essentially the disappearance of cash is one of the reasons why central banks are exploring CBDCs, because cash, is a form of universally accessible public money, which not only allows people to have complete ownership of their money, but it also provides a kind of monetary anchor to the banking system. So the reason why we trust the money in our bank account is because we know, even though these are deposits which are created by banks, and not money in a sense that we would understand it like notes and coins, we know that they can be converted to these notes and coins and are redeemable in that way. So, with the loss of a kind of public form of money, the private monetary system becomes more unstable. And that's the reason why central banks are trying to introduce a new form of public digital money in the form of a central bank digital currency, because the only other form of public money is central bank reserves, which are only accessible to the banking system. So essentially, a central bank digital currency would level the playing field, open up the access to our central bank to everyone. Everyone can have an account at the central bank and will no longer need to use banks or rely on banks to store or make payments, store their money or make payments. So yeah, another big reason CBDCs are also being introduced is because of the threat of private competitors. So I think Barry mentioned before Facebook's Libra, or now it's called DM project. Central banks really accelerated in the last couple of years their CBDC research because there was this threat of alternative like corporate kind of stable coins like Facebook's DM project, which would essentially, you know, if they could be plugged into Facebook's network and they could be scaled up through a network effect, and essentially monetary sovereignty could be surrendered away from central banks and to even less accountable multinational corporations like Facebook and the various companies in that consortium. And obviously, you know, there's huge issues about privacy and data. You know, we've seen Facebook can't be trusted with our data as it currently is. Imagine if they had access to all of our payments data. And then Facebook and companies like that, you know, like to spin it as if they are, you know, trying to increase financial inclusion, but they understand that, you know, data is the new oil, as people have been saying for years now, and particularly payments data is extremely valuable, and they will be looking for ways to monetize and mine our data essentially, or to kind of monopolize the payment system, as we've seen card companies attempting to do, to essentially, you know, force us to rely on these services, and then they can extract economic rent from it. But there is a potentially positive. Have I got 1 minute?
Yeah, one, maybe two.
Okay, I'll just very briefly try and sketch out a positive alternative to, you know, that kind of dystopian sounding thing. So even, you know, Mark Carney, Andy Haldane recently, you know, prominent former Bank of England figures have been saying that, you know, a CBDC could offer us a chance to circumvent the traditional banking system. And by that, they mean that essentially we will no longer need to rely on banks. Banks will no longer be able to as easily create so much money. So we will have what, you know, has been referred to a narrow banking system, or what positive money have called a sovereign money system, where banks aren't able to create new money, and we have a separation between transaction accounts and investment accounts. So, you know, the money in your account used for transactions is risk-free, but you can invest it in an investment account instead. And new money would enter through what we'd see in our vision, because there would be, the banking system would be less able to create new money. New money would primarily enter the economy through, you know, democratically decided public spending, through perhaps a helicopter drop, so money distributed equally to all citizens, or through, you know, a new banking system, new models of banking which have access to central bank funds. I would sketch a positive vision very briefly for, you know, a kind of new money and banking ecosystem, which involves, underneath it is the central bank digital currency, which is accountable and with privacy checks and balances to protect against some of the things that have been discussed before, but also kind of an end-to-end public option, from all the way up from the central bank's balance sheet and the back end to the front end, to a public option, like a front end, like the post office. So people can go to a trusted public institution if they want to access digital money. So yeah, I think, you know, there's a huge debate over what happens when we do have a CBDC. Some people like Mark Carney think that we'll have a greater reliance on market-based finance to increase funding for the real economy, but we would argue that has its own problems there that could lead to even more instability and, you know, capital, us being more at the whims of global international capital flows. So we would argue for a public alternative, with public money creation, and yeah, making sure the creation and control of money is more democratically controlled in the hands of the public, and not, you know, separated out to bankers, whether that be central bankers or commercial bankers. So I'll leave it there because I've realised I've overrun, but there's obviously so much to say on all of this, and I really look forward to further discussion.
I'm really grateful for that, Simon, and I'm sure there'll be lots more questions in a little while. I'd just like to just ask one now, partly by way of summary. So you said some interesting things there. One of them is that we have this hostile relationship, and that's because of this capture, isn't it? It's because banks have captured the money system. They effectively get to create 97% of the money in circulation, and they rent it to us. So the question really is, obviously the banks aren't going to give that up very easily. Are we right to think of this as a tipping point where the debate isn't going to happen by itself because they'll want to get on with it? But if we can raise the debate, isn't this an opportunity for the first time in certainly 40 years to redress some of these things? Would that be right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the biggest risk, or maybe a slightly smaller risk. So I guess there are like two potential bad scenarios. There's one where it could become like a dystopia, as we've talked about, kind of like used as a means of social control and surveillance, whether by the state or by corporations. There's a slightly less dangerous, but equally, well, not equally, but fairly bad option is that we continue under the current system, and essentially CBDC becomes captive to banks, and it's just used as a way to make their payments more efficient, and essentially the bank, it's designed in a way which fits into banks' existing models, and it's like plugs into the existing system rather than being a system changer. So I think, as you've said, this is a really big opportunity, and it's kind of worrying how little public debate there's been, and there should have been throughout history potentially more public debate on the creation of our architecture, of our monetary and financial architecture, and this is a real opportunity to have that debate. And it's good that there are some like consultations and engagement forums the Bank of England are doing on it, and we'd encourage people to engage with that, and see if we can influence that, because definitely the bankers will be trying to influence it, and the fintech companies, often the big Silicon Valley companies, will also be trying to have their say.
Yes, thanks, Simon. The banks will be using their awesome lobbying power. Absolutely awesome. They have an unlimited amount of money to spend on it. Awesome lobbying power to make sure they get the outcome that they desire, which has huge implications, as we've seen, for our privacy. There's some great questions coming up in the chat I've seen already. We'll come to some of those later, and when we hear from David Orrell, we'll also talk about the understanding of money, and we tend to think of money as an external thing, and he'll be talking to us about the understanding of how it actually entangles us, and we tend to assume it's a relatively simple thing. It's an extremely complex thing, which came out in my discussion with our next speaker, actually in the section before we started recording, unfortunately. But I asked him about this, and he said there's probably only half a dozen people in the world who really thoroughly understand how money works. He's one of them. It is a deep subject, and the general idea that it's simply a token that has value it just doesn't bear scrutiny. What goes on behind the scenes, and these days the financial engineering that happens, that creates money pumps. There's a great book we won't get to touch on this evening, but I will mention Runaway Inequality by Les Leopold, who has traced how they work, how the extractive economy that also Mariana Mazzucato has talked about. So let me without further ado get to Steve Steve Keen. Hello, I'm delighted to right now be with Steve Keen, who is well known for his work on, I suppose we have to call it heterodox economics.
That'll do, yeah.
Yeah. So just what a pleasure to meet you, Steve. But, you know, would you, for those who aren't necessarily as familiar with your work as some of us, would you just give us a little bit of background on, you know, what got you here?
Okay, I've retired as a professor of economics, but my last post was at Kingston, and I'm now at the honorary professor at UCL. I've always been working on critiquing mainstream economics and trying to develop an alternative, because if anybody who's learnt economics learns supply and demand, and it all looks like it holds together, and it doesn't. When you go back and take a look in the actual foundation literature, none of the concepts that are necessary for that simple diagram to work actually apply, either theoretically or empirically. So I've been pulling that apart. The main book I ever wrote was called Debunking Economics. That's now in its second edition, and I'll be writing the third next year. And then at the same time, I've been trying to develop alternative approaches to economics, doing economics without micro foundations, without the notions of supply and demand and utility maximization and so on. And probably the first cohesive statement of that alternative approach I'm publishing in, I think, October or November through Polity Press, and that's called The New Economics, a Manifesto. And as part of that, I built software to be able to enable monetary non-equilibrium modeling of the economy, because neoclassicals, what's mainstream economics is called neoclassical by those who understand it. And that, of course, doesn't include most neoclassical economists. So my software package, Minsky, is designed to enable you to model the economy as a monetary phenomenon, and at the same time a complex system. I mean, if you want to make an analogy to economics, I talk about it's like astronomy at the time of Copernicus, and the majority of astronomers are working from the great book of Aristotle, modified by Ptolemy, to explain the movement of the planets, which is the Greek word meaning wandering stars, I think. Using the idea that the Earth is the center of the universe, and the sun, the moon, the planets and the stars all orbit around us on perfect concentric circles. And they've spent a lot of time working systems of circles on circles with little deviations, so justified by appeals to authority and philosophy, that mean that the model fits the data pretty well and is completely and utterly wrong. And along comes Copernicus and says the planet is the Earth is a planet. It orbits the sun, along with the other planets, and the stars are far away. And they're laughed at, ridiculed, and exiled by the church, which is backing the authority of the astronomers. That's pretty much economics. Neoclassical economics has a model which is almost, but not quite, completely wrong, but which they've worked so hard at it that it appears to fit the data until something they don't expect comes along, like a global financial crisis, and then their predictions are completely, obviously, ludicrously wrong. But they continue being supported because the church these days, the corollary for the church is the financial sector. Yeah. And it does very well, thanks very much, out of all the nonsense that neoclassical economics pumps out, which has enabled the finance sector to take over for industrial capitalism. Well, I'm in favour of central bank digital currencies for a number of reasons. The trouble is, I know that one of the reasons they've been talked about is because central banks want to abolish cash. Not all of them, but some central banks do. And the reason they want to abolish cash is because they, in their models, they would like, for example, to encourage people to spend more to boost the economy. And when they want to do that is to have negative interest rates on deposit accounts. But if you put negative interest rates on deposit accounts, the sensible thing as a depositor is take your money out in cash, which breaks the whole system down. So there's a solution. Hey presto, let's have let's create central bank digital currencies and then abolish cash. So you can't take your money out. It's either in a private bank account or a central bank digital currency account. Now that's insane. It's stupid, and it's the last thing I'd ever support. But I think that's one reason for the public to say you do not abolish cash. Okay, you create this as an additional form of money, not a way to replace cash. And enough democratic protest about it will stop that happening. And then the existence of a digital currency will mean that there'll be an avenue to do things when you want to do them in a hurry, that can't be done right now. So one example, if we go back to the global financial crisis in 2007, 2008, in Australia, where I was living at the time, one way the government tried to counteract the huge decline in credit-based demand was to give everybody who'd paid their tax return that year, unfortunately didn't include me, I was a bit slow, I always am, $1,000 to spend. And that was easy to do because in Australia, you pay your taxes electronically. You get your tax refund electronically. So all of your personal bank accounts were already known by the Treasury. They simply put an entry of $1,000 in everybody's account. That worked very well. Now, when I found England discussing the same thing, they said they couldn't do it. It'd take them 6 months to organise the system to do it, which is one reason you didn't get a stimulus like Australia got. And as a result of that stimulus, Australia was one of 2 countries in the OECD that did not suffer a recession in 2008. Now, if you had central bank digital currencies there, they might be, dormant, not doing anything, and then a financial crisis comes along, and bang, you put $1,000 in everybody's digital currency account, and it's done instantaneously. Now, that's not how I'd use it in the future. I don't see another global financial crisis coming our way, but it's a structure that could be used by the government money creating authorities when it's necessary to do so in a hurry. And there are other reasons as well that I'd like to see it coming in. So, yeah, favour of it, but don't let the economists control how it's done. Yeah, possibly, but I mean, at the same time, if they're getting enough flack, they'll hold off on trying to abolish cash. I mean, abolishing cash is sticking your neck up. No, it's not sticking your neck up on the parapet. It's jumping up on the parapet, taking your clothes off, and wiggling your backside at the army. I think even though most people aren't particularly interested in economics and don't really care about the whole thing, if you told them we're going to abolish cash, I think there'd be a riot. And knowing how conservative and timid most central bankers are, I think they'll say, "Oh no, we don't want to do that. We'll just do the digital currency." So I think we're safe.
But we need to be vigilant as well, by the sound of it. But
don't give them an easy time. Any suggestion of abolishing cash as a result of that gets short shrift. Yeah, I mean, you want something which people can verify for themselves, but you think you don't want anything like what's happened with blockchain and Bitcoin. I don't want energy consumption to be a major part of these central bank digital currencies, because that's one reason that I think the Bitcoin, I think, it will never be money and will actually probably at some point justifiably be shut down because we simply can't afford to have a single element of energy consumption that is wasteful. And with Bitcoin qualifies, but I think at the moment Bitcoin is consuming more energy than Argentina.
There's no need for that in the design though, and the design is now up for grabs, isn't it?
Yeah. So, but if you have a central bank digital currency, then there's one ledger, which is the central bank's ledger. Now, what you want is transparent access to that ledger, and you probably want 1 or 2 external verifications of it. But that'd be enough, and that therefore means you don't need the crazy hashing issues that are part of anonymously verifying Bitcoin production. Well, you want the transparency, you want the visibility of the ledger, obviously, and anonymized visibility. You need people to verify their transactions. You need the reason that there are lots of issues about bringing in a form of money like that in terms of how it could affect the current financial systems. I know one reason the Bank of England backed off is because the banks were saying, look, if you make that central bank digital currency account equivalent to somebody's deposit account, then people could easily take their money out of our deposit accounts, which drops the assets and the liabilities of the banking sector dramatically, and could put some of them in financial give them a negative equity situation. So that's one reason the Bank of England backed off. So you do have to have issues about what's the relationship between the digital bank central currency and your deposit accounts. Can you simply transfer across or can you not? So initially, I would be setting up controls to mean that, for example, the government could put money in those accounts, but you can't transfer your money to a central bank digital currency account. Or if you're shopping with somebody else, you might have a balance in your central bank digital currency account, which you could transfer to somebody else's balance, but you can't be then transferring your credit-based money deposit account money into that. So, I haven't sat down and tried to work out what those rules should be, but you would need rules like that to make sure that you didn't totally disrupt the actual financial system by bringing in this new structure. I mean, it was always a huge mistake to have the American dollar as the vehicle for international trade. That was the stupidest thing done at Bretton Woods, and Keynes wanted to bring in what he called the Bancor as an international currency for international trade only, issued to countries in proportion to their GDPs, valued with a fixed value, but which could be changed if a country is running a permanent trade deficit or surplus. And with the objective of limiting trade surpluses and deficits to no more than 2% of GDP. Now, instead of that, we got the insane system with the Americans where you've got to use a domestic currency for international trade. That's one reason the American dollar got overvalued. It's one reason American manufacturing suffered compared to the rest of the world, because you had a demand for American dollars in addition to a demand for American goods, and therefore you had people putting buying pressure on the dollar and driving it up, which was one reason why their industrial sector has declined over time. So there's definitely a need for a system which is not based on a domestic currency, and in some ways, the more domestic currencies are involved in international trade, the more it's an international system. So if the renminbi is there as a basis, as well as the American dollar, then you break down that dominance of the American dollar and the overvaluation effect on the American dollar as well. So I see that as a good thing, even for the Americans, although I don't expect the Americans to realize it. So there's various good things about that, and it also could potentially lead to the situation where we, 60 years too late, or 80 years too late, we get the system Keynes wanted back in 1944.
I'm actually going to pause there, and we'll look at making the rest of that video available later because of time. But some incredibly important points there. As I mentioned on that video, loath though I am to disagree with or contradict Steve, the problems with energy consumption won't affect CBDCs. It'd be amazing if it did. If for no other reason, that they're very unlikely to use blockchain as anything more than a toolkit, but they're certainly not going to adopt the same methods as Bitcoin, which is reforming itself anyway. But some incredibly important things that bear on the nation states question, which we'll come to later. But because of time, I'm going to move quickly on to the interview with David Orrell, who is extraordinarily well known and is indeed one of those doing great work to refound economics on an actual scientific basis, rather than the pseudoscientific basis which it has at the moment. He has relatively recently published Quantum Economics, the New Science of Money, which anyone who knows me will have heard about by now, which is an enormously powerful both critique of the existing system and application of new ideas. But he's got a lot to say about the nature of money and about the way it entangles us. And one of the things that to watch out for in this, and perhaps we'll see where we are at the end, but there is good money, there is bad money, and money shapes us. A wise man said, first we shape our tools, and then our tools shape us. Let's see what David Orrell's got to say. And right now, I'm delighted to be with leading thinker and author David Orrell, amongst other things, author of actually many books, but one that's taking my thinking by storm right now. The full title is Quantum Economics, the New Science of Money. Isn't it shocking that economics has largely excluded money? We'll come to that in a moment or two. But first of all, welcome, David. And would you just kind of, welcome, and would you just tell us a little bit more about your background?
Sure. Well, thank you, Barry. It's very nice to be here. And so I'm an applied mathematician by training. And I worked in, nice thing about applied math is you can apply it to different things. So I applied it to different areas, including forecasting, prediction of nonlinear systems, this kind of thing. And from that, I wrote a book about prediction in different areas. And so I had, a section on weather forecasting and a section on genetics and biology. And then I thought there should be a section on economics. And so I started researching that. And this was like about, back in 2007 or something like that. And I found that the economics thing just seemed rather strange, like the way that we were making predictions about the economy, it seemed different from the other areas. It's sort of the same in some ways, but kind of missing some things, And so from that, so that's how I got into economics. I didn't sort of study at a university or take that route. It was more through writing books. And then after like a while, I kind of came to this idea that money has these dualistic properties, that it acts like a real thing, like like gold or something that we own, that we possess, but it's also a virtual number, which is not like a number on account, which you can swap with somebody else. And then when you think about that, it's kind of it's sort of a tricky thing, because kind of bridging these two worlds. And it seems like the right kind of mathematical formalism was to tackle it with the quantum approach. And when normally when you say quantum, people immediately start thinking about tiny subatomic particles that we can't see doing kind of crazy stuff. But I think like a better way to look at it is in terms of quantum probability. So basically, it's a kind of a math for treating systems which are in a kind of they're inherently probabilistic, and they can be entangled with one another, and you can have interference between opposing conflicts, and these are the sorts of things which I feel characterize the economy and the money system in particular. So. Yes, yeah. So in economists, I actually had 10 of them. So they got things about equilibrium, the idea that we're rational, the idea that we act as individuals rather than as a group, and so on and so forth. And I think these in the book, I argued that these are very they're actually sort of ancient principles, which are sort of very prevalent in all sorts of areas of our of the way that we think about the world, but we just kind of reached this rather extreme state in economics. And when you think about it, it's sort of extraordinary when you think about the economy, that the models which we're using are still based on equilibrium. I mean, they always sort of, they allow perturbations. They allow the fact that you'll have a shock from outside and it will disturb the equilibrium, and then it will take a while to relax back. And they actually call these frictions, which sort of slow down the reaching to equilibrium. But it's a very strange way of thinking about the economy when because the economy is like an example of a complex dynamic system that's evolving all the time, that's constantly surprising us, right? We had the 2007-8 financial crisis, which was not well predicted, although one of your guests obviously called it, Steve Keen. But but recently with the COVID crisis, the economy again reacted in a surprising way. So equilibrium doesn't really, it's not the first word that comes to mind, right? Yeah, sort of the most remarkable thing about economics in a way is that it's somehow managed to omit money, from the analysis. So money obviously is treated as a metric. We say whether something's expensive or cheap or whatnot. We talk about budgets, but the idea, the properties of money, we don't talk about those. Like money is a highly psychoactive substance. So behavioral economists use it as sort of like a version of a drug, which they can, use to motivate their subjects to act in one way or another. It's a very powerful thing. And everybody knows that the thrill that you get when you get a bonus, or the opposite of that when you lose money. So it's very emotional. And somehow economics has kind of stripped all of that out, but it's also kind of taken attention away from, by treating money as just a metric, we forget about how money is created, like where it comes from, and how that process works. And I think it was only kind of recently, like a few years ago, that suddenly central bankers started kind of coming out and writing papers and saying that actually money is not created by, not even controlled by central banks. It's the process is controlled by private banks who make money by making loans. And when you look at when you look at what a loan is, so this is not like some neutral thing where you just get some numbers. It's an entangling contract, between two parties. So when you go into a debt contract, that's an entanglement, and that's something that you can formally model, using the concept of entanglement and quantum probability, which is one reason we do it. So it's so money is, and I think this kind of goes back to the thing that classical economics, like you're saying, it concentrates on this sort of equilibrium, unity, rational, blah blah. The thing about money is it doesn't fit into that picture at all. It's not individuals. People are not individuals when it comes to money. They're entangled. People are not rational when it comes to money. They're rational, but they're also emotional. And money does not behave in a nice linear equilibrium, sort of way. It's dynamic. It leads to sort of financial booms and crashes, and this kind of thing. So maybe that's one reason we don't talk about those. It's related, right? We don't talk about money. It doesn't fit in with any of the key concepts. So. Yeah. I think one thing is like the best way to make money is to literally make it. And that's what banks do. They create money out of nowhere, and it is sort of funny because a few years ago suddenly, central bankers started saying this in speeches. They started saying, well, we create money out of nothing, and they use these words, and they said that, well, one reason the crisis was not well predicted was because it didn't take money creation into account. So it's kind of interesting that discussions, because this was not invented, yesterday. This has been going on ever since, our modern monetary system was invented, right? So. I think there's a story around money, which has been, it's sort of interesting, I guess, to view it almost from an anthropological point of view or something, and say, what is this story doing? Who is it serving? Who does it work for? Who does it not work for? And I think one thing that's sort of interesting right now is people are suddenly realizing that actually everything is a lot more immutable than we were taught to believe. We always sort of had this feeling, money has to be earned, and and if you don't work, you're not going to get paid, and the government cannot create money out of nothing and give it to you, And then suddenly we have this crisis, and I don't know, like here in Canada, it seemed like money was just sort of there's suddenly abundance of it, not everywhere, and this is another thing that people became very aware of, the inequality of the money system, because we had these headlines from a year ago, I think, in the US, that unemployment was sort of hitting a record high, and the stock market was making, hitting a record high kind of at the same time. So it's like this is another effect of money. In the classical model, the idea is that, everyone gets their fair share. That's like the things are sort of distributed according to how useful and efficient you are. But it's just becoming more and more obvious that things are being totally skewed towards, asset holders, the ones who are kind of, higher up in this kind of money chain. Well, yeah, certainly it's incredibly important, because money is kind of behind most of the sort of big problems that we face. So for example, if you think of inequality, as I mentioned, this is not something that kind of comes out of nowhere. It's been driven in a large part. So again, here in Canada, we've had asset price inflation, something like 30% or more in real estate. So there's a huge divide. And meanwhile, all the people, who do not benefit from all of this, people who are like renters or people who are losing their jobs and so on, are kind of going down the opposite direction. So inequality is, and this asset price inflation is not something that's coming because people are finding houses more attractive. It's because the money creation machine is intimately linked with real estate. So you can sort of view it as a real estate financial complex, where basically loans are made against real estate. Those loans create effectively new money, which then goes into the economy, but it does not go into like buying soap or whatever. It goes into buying more real estate. So if you look at a plot of inflation in real estate, it's exponential. If you look at a plot of inflation in the rest of the economy, it's kind of, it's flat. It's not really going anywhere, right? So it is inflation, but it's just not, the kind that is picked up by metrics. So inequality, financial instability is because our money system is completely debt-based and is sort of reliant on this positive feedback between loans and asset value, which kind of grows exponentially, but nothing can grow to the sky. And eventually, you get this Minsky cycle thing, as it's called, where things go into reverse, and debts get called in. And so you end up with financial, and we all know about that from the 2007-8 crisis. I think the environmental crisis is intimately linked with money. I mean, it's not kind of the first thing that you might think. Normally we think about oil or gas or, resources or whatever, but money is hugely important because, first of all, because it goes into all of those activities, but also it's linked with basically economic development of a certain kind, like, again, buying more and more real estate, buying more and bigger houses. That's what drives certainly the economy in countries like Canada, Australia, New Zealand to a large extent. It's just that kind of activity, which is profoundly, unenvironmental. It's like the last thing that we should be doing in the middle of an environmental crisis, right? So money is behind all of these things. So conversely, you can attack many of these problems by creating like a well-designed money system. The thing is, I guess I see the big challenge as not being so much a technical one about sitting down and designing, the money system. Well, I guess to be more accurate, I would say it's balance between that and how you make it work. Because the other thing about money is that money is power. That's the other reason it's kind of neglected from mainstream economics, is because they don't really want to talk about that. But money is power, and so how are we going to implement a new money system when, like in Canada, again, if you look at the real estate financial complex, it's like responsible for all of the largest companies, several, the top 5 banks are, like among the largest companies and the largest, most powerful companies in the country. How are you going to, you can't just, this is their business model. How are you going to handle that? That's going to be a real tricky part. Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think in terms of politics, again, I think money has performed kind of a trick on people and perhaps on politicians. I don't know, but so for example, when there's tension about these things, about inequality, instability, and so on, like for example, concern about rising house prices here in Canada, it's all the debate is about things like immigration, or about greedy developers, or about the lack of development. And this is happening when, I mean, we haven't actually had any immigration in the last year because of significant immigration because of the COVID thing, but prices went up by like 30% or whatever in many places. So it's like it's an amazing distraction, from the real thing that's going on, which is the money supply. And so it's being captured, basically, right? This whole thing is being captured. It's not being scrutinized politically. It's not being scrutinized democratically. It's like it's not getting any of the attention that it deserves. The economics profession is sort of a key enabler of this whole system. That's how I would see it, is to sort of enabled it, by sitting back and letting it happen. And I think a first step is to start talking about money, develop a system for understanding money, understanding the role of money, and bringing it, as you say, into the the democratic process, because there's no what larger question is there, right, for our children, for our future, that is not touched by this. So.
Absolutely. And of course, what happens next over the next 5 years is going to affect generations to come.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, I agree. And
so much more to talk about, David. A delight to talk to you, particularly at this really crucial time. I do hope we'll talk again soon, but for now, thank you for your contribution today. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Some really powerful insights and words there from David Orrell. There's some really interesting discussions going on there, I see in the chat. But just one comment is that central banks are fundamentally different in the way that they create money to debt-based money, which is what is created in commercial banks. It's a relatively technical thing, and I'm trying to avoid getting too technical, but we'll skip on. A couple more things to cover. And a bit of a roundup, and then we're going to move to questions as quickly as possible. The stakes could hardly be higher, as David made absolutely clear there, not just for us. And we're not just talking about our grandchildren, we're talking about 5 years' time less. We're talking about our children, and we're talking about those of us who are going to be around in 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 years' time. It's pretty much almost as stark as this, that this is what we've done on the screen here and are doing, and we're not moving fast enough to fix it because we're focused, broadly speaking, GDP and money. And this is the one opportunity that is there to take back control, because we're out of control very clearly. And we are at a crossroads. History tells us that all civilizations die. That's all so far. Very few of them have come anywhere near to wrecking the planet, but we have, and that's not a distinction we'd want. Right now, we are playing with fire. We are playing with a fire that is economically induced, randomized genocide if we carry on as we are. There is a turning point, an inflection point in human and planetary history, with the opportunity to turn the engine of change, our monetary system, into a force for good. That actually could be done. And to deal with the root of the problems that are enslaving so many people and trapping them in debt and in financial insecurity and pain. And we have to do this. The alternative is unthinkable. The stakes couldn't be higher. And to do this, we need scrutiny, but we need more than that. The central banks are saying then they're not going to withdraw cash. That's good. They're saying the data, the vast amounts of daily, hugely valuable data won't be used at all. That's unrealistic. And they're saying that our privacy will be safeguarded, but not how. And there's a very, very strong argument for saying this calls for a much higher level of scrutiny than hitherto. And I'm going to ask the question, shouldn't we have a social foundation, a new digital native, born digital foundation that can allow us, the people who create the monetary system, to own it, for it to be operated on our behalf and for our benefit. And in a democracy, why wouldn't we seek such a new institution? Kate Rayworth, referenced here, talks about the donut model, and we need to design money around that as well. So it helps create a sustainable economy that is circular in nature. Many of you will already be familiar, I know, with donut economics and the seminal work that Kate and her team have done. But we need a new social foundation, a new institution that, separate from the central bank, that has other concerns as well, that is representative of us, the people, and can operate the system, oversee it, and oversee its development. We don't want to create a static system now. We know that's a mistake. In a world that's changing and is dynamic, we need to create good money that works for us and works in a sustainable way. And we can do it, and we must do this. But I can tell you that already the predators are circling. And I know this for a fact because I've had conversations with people who are involved. There are bankers coming together with American VCs with their eyes on the digital pound. They see the opportunity to make vast sums out of money out of playing a role in designing and creating this. I'm not making this up. I have recorded an interview on this, which I'm not planning to release. But Ian, if you're listening, I'm sure it'd be an interesting listen for you as an author. But we know this is happening. But actually, we don't even need to think about that. We need to think about the road we're on and the road we need to be on. We need to do this. We need to create a template, not just for the UK, but for the world, that's good money, that's there for and created for the many, not the few. As I said, a new institution, a new social foundation, which can be used to help create a circular economy that can thrive in balance, as Kate Raworth has taught us in her economics, and work in balance with the planet, creating sustainable ecosystems that work with nature rather than mining it. And it starts right here and right now. I mentioned the navigation group earlier. Not just inviting you, I'm urging you, because we need to make this change, to join the navigation group, work with us. Together, we can do far more than apart. And at that point, I'm going to hand back with thanks to Andy for questions and so on. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you very much indeed, Barry. That was excellent. That really was. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we've witnessed a very, very thought-provoking session from many first-class speakers, including Barry's own contribution. Before we do anything else, I'm sure you would be very happy to join me in thanking Barry and everybody else that's participated so far. Let's please show our appreciation. Barry, well done. Thank you very, very much indeed. Excellent. Really good, really good. I think we've kicked off onto a really great start here. I'm going to spend a few minutes adding in one or two of my own thoughts, and then we'll go to Q&A. Then we're going to hear from Mark Falcon as well. Mark's a very well-established ambassador of the TTF, always worth listening to Mark's thoughts. What I want to do is simply talk about the nature of the banking sector as a whole in very, very general terms. What you're looking at, ladies and gentlemen, is a database called Violation Tracker. Violation Tracker tracks corporate infringements. To be more precise, it tracks corporate infringements against the United States authorities. And within Violation Tracker, there are something like 490,000 civil and criminal cases from more than 300 agencies, with penalties of 669 billion. Please remember that figure, 669 billion. You'll see why in a short while. One of the things you can do with this very, very powerful public good, this wonderful database, is you can click on this bit here where it says industry totals, and I will share the link to this database shortly. And what you get straight away is a ranking according to the amount of fines and penalties and prosecutions against different parts of the economy. So you'll see here, financial services is the most penalized part of the economy. Now that in and of itself is a real problem, because I would argue, and I'm sure you would all agree with me, that the financial services sector, above all perhaps, needs to be the most trustworthy of all. You know, the entire monetary system is built on the idea that it can be believed in, that it's something we can trust and rely on. The word credit comes from the Latin credere, which means to believe in. So it's a bit bizarre and rather worrying, isn't it, folks, that the industry that ought to be the most trusted would appear to be the least trustworthy. Not only is it the least trustworthy out of a total of 51, I think it is, 51 industries, it is the least trustworthy by a long way. Look, here's the total amount of fines, 332 billion against the financial services sector since the year 2000, which, if you remember that previous figure I showed you, I think it was 669 billion. So what this means, folks, is that the financial services sector accounts for roughly half of all the infringements against the US authorities. And this is a real worry. And it's a real worry because of what I'm about to show you. When you click on financial services, you then get a breakdown of the worst offending companies. You'll see here Bank of America is the worst offending organization, $82 billion worth of fines. But the really worrying bit is this. When you scroll down, what you're looking at now, folks, is a list of the individual infringements for all kinds of things: toxic securities abuses, mortgage abuses, investor protection violations, fraud, Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, banking violations. It goes on, it goes on. And what you actually see is a pattern. And the pattern is that the same organizations are being caught doing the same kind of naughty things, being fined and carrying on. This suggests there's recidivism, the behavior of carrying on doing bad stuff, even though you've been caught, told off and prosecuted. This, to my mind, points to a toxic culture within the banking sector. And that's why when Barry first talked to me about the idea of this event, and why I learned that there was a lot of change happening behind closed doors, so to speak, without much scrutiny, without much transparency, without much public debate, without much news, without much anything. It's just quietly happening in the background. My instincts were telling me, this ain't right. You know, this ain't right. It ain't right that such a big paradigm shifting change is happening in the shadows. Now, I generally do not know enough about the topic to know the right and wrong here, but my instincts are telling me that if it's happening in the shadows, if it's happening quietly, if it's happening in boardrooms of major institutions who are built to make money at the expense of society, history has proven that many, many times over, we ought to be having a chat about it, at least. So I've got no idea what the right and wrong is here. I've got no idea what the right way forward is. But everything in every instinct in me is saying this needs to be much more out in the open. If we're talking about long-term systemic, infrastructural, ecosystemic change, it would be foolish. It would be profoundly imprudent to let that happen without the people being aware of what's going on. And that's why I personally think that this initiative, Barry's ideas, are really good, because we really do need to make sure that what happens in the sunlight. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. We need big bright lights shining on this stuff to get it out in the open. We're going to ask Mark Falcon to share his brief thoughts in a moment, and then what we're going to do is open it to Q&A. We'll be formally wrapped up by 8 o'clock, but I'm very happy for those that want to stick around to carry on the chat for a while after that. I've got a feeling many of you would like to say something. You've all got points of view. Let's take the opportunity to hear them. But if I could please ask Mark Falcon to use his just a minute round just to give us a kind of high level overview of his perspectives. And Mark, why don't you kick off with a brief introduction to yourself and then dive into your thoughts. Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, thanks very much, Andy. Thanks for the opportunity, and thanks very much, Barry, and to the other speakers. So I'm an economist, in particular an antitrust economist, specializing in the financial services and technology sectors, and I do a lot of work supporting consumer groups as well. Including really the Transparency Task Force, but also the likes of Citizens Advice and Which, acting to bring consumer redress. And this topic is one that I've followed with a lot of interest because I work a lot also in the payments sector. But there's a very large amount of what Barry said and the other speakers that I really disagree with. In part, the ranting against economics, because I think a lot of that's based on conspiracy theory, but also a lot of the hyperbole role with central bank digital currencies, that we heard from one of the other speakers in particular, that all the problems that Elise allegedly going to solve. And a lot of it is because, in my view, central bank digital currency is a big misnomer. The standard definition of a currency is that it is a means of account, a store of value, and a method of payment. And obviously, cash fulfills those definitions. It's a store of value. It's clearly a method of payment, and it's that's how accounts are based. And I think the speakers are right. Simon was right that a lot of it is driven by the war on cash. And Simon's absolutely right that cash is the public money, which only represents a very small fraction of the digital money that already exists in the banking system, but the ideas that have been put forward for central bank digital currencies, they don't provide either a means of payment or a store of value, except maybe with the case of China, because in order to do that, it would mean that consumers would have to have access to the central bank balance sheet and to be able to open an account at the central bank. And I think all central bankers have really absolutely repudiated that idea. They're very reluctant to open up their balance sheets certainly not to consumers, but not even to corporations. And it's been a big challenge opening up central bank money, even beyond large banks, say to electronic money institutions. But even if that were the case, it isn't a method of payment either, because to have a method of payment, there needs a whole distribution mechanism. And that method of payment at the moment is, I think as Barry and Simon have alluded to, actually it's not owned any longer by the banks. One thing that's been missed is that payments are owned by very powerful corporations. Actually, the largest and most powerful financial corporations in the world, the card schemes, and Visa and MasterCard are larger than any other bank in the world, and they have very much led a strategy of war on cash. But central bank digital currencies aren't going to solve that problem. I think that's a delusion, and it's not going to happen. What's needed is effective regulation of our existing financial system, in particular. In this space, in particular, the card schemes, because they do have huge economic power, huge monopoly rents that they generate. So I think that's the focus should be, and this idea that central bank digital currencies are the solution, I think is misplaced. So that's my thought on it. And thanks, Andy, for the opportunity.
This is exactly what we want. We want people sharing their views, sharing their perspectives, agreeing, sometimes disagreeing constructively. This is the whole idea of a symposium, where we can influence the thinking of each other. This is not a seminar, it's not a conference, it's not all about one particular perspective at all. So I really do welcome the difference of opinion. That's exactly what we're trying to stimulate. So fantastic, Mark, absolutely great to share an alternative view. Let's go to Barry to see his response, and then we'll open up for Q&A. I reckon we'll be around for maybe another 10, 15, 20 minutes or so. We'll see how things go. Barry, over to you.
I'm a champion of conversation and debate, and let's do it. So the first thing I would say is, yeah, there is an issue around payment systems. This will change payment systems. It will provide a challenge, but those payment systems, Visa and MasterCard and so on, do not have what the banks have, the ability to create money, and that's crucial. So that's the first point. The second point in response I would make, because there were many points, but there's a really important one, is that the idea that what Steve Keen was saying and David Orrell was saying is some kind of conspiracy theory is just plain wrong. There are a whole phalanx of economists and the rising, the new economists, the not the dyed in the wool ones, who have recognized this. And I would challenge Mark to read David Orrell's other book called Economyths, and then let's talk.
Wonderful. Okay. The discussion is
love to
happening.
chat more, Barry.
Yeah, you two guys should share contact details. Okay, folks. So I've just put it onto gallery view so I can see everybody. We've got a couple of pages worth of people on the screen in front of me here. So just wave your hand or raise your hand digitally if you'd like to share an opinion. What I would ask, however, please, is can I ask everybody to be as succinct as you can to give us as much chance to share, give everybody a chance to share their views. I saw Mr. Michael Kumhoff raise his hand. Michael, please share your thought, but before you do so, confirm which hat you're wearing. Are we listening to Michael Kumhoff, the man, or are we listening to the organization you work for? I have a suspicion it might be the former, sir.
You are certainly not listening to the organization. I wanted to say that I agree entirely with what Barry James just said, and I agree entirely with what Steve Keen said earlier about the state of economics as far as these questions are concerned. And I'm an economist myself. I taught at a major university and I'm senior advisor at the Bank of England. And I do recognize where Steve Keen is coming from. Furthermore, Mark Falcon made two statements that I think are just not factually supported, namely that central banks are not thinking about opening up their balance sheet. That's what the whole debate is about. This is not to say that they're definitely going to do it. Bank of England is not necessarily going to do it, but they are thinking about it. And so are many other central banks. And the idea that central bank digital currency will not be a means of payment is also factually not supported, because a lot of the research that is going on at central banks is precisely about what would we have to do to make it an effective means of payment. Now, it is possible that it's impossible to do or prohibitively costly, but it is being considered, because otherwise the whole exercise would be pointless.
Michael, thank you very much indeed. This is getting even more interesting, folks. I've learned so much tonight. Please raise your hand or wave something at me if you'd like to say something, whether that's a comment or a question. Michaela, we're going to go to you. Michaela, I must ask you, please be succinct for me. No more than about 30 seconds. Go for it, Michaela.
Just for you guys to know, I am a PhD physicist. So for me, the word quantum that gets thrown around is a bit ridiculous. Now, I don't know if I'm going to tell you an anecdote. You know that very central to the quantum physics is Schrödinger's cat. So the idea is that we do not know the true state of a system, like if a cat is dead or alive in an elevator, until the doors of the elevator open and you can make the measurement. So think about your bank account. It might be empty until you open it. So are you telling me that this is quantum finance or quantum economics? Okay, you can have 1 million in your account or you can have 0. We don't know. That's all.
I guarantee, Michaela, I definitely do not have 1 million in my account. Let's go to the next person who'd like to share a thought. It looks like we're all going to go to Jeff Quintero. Mr. Jeff Quintero, please tell us who you are, what you do, where you are, and then make your point. Thanks, Jeff.
Make my point directly to say that it doesn't matter who I am, where I come from, how I got here. Today, we have revealed that this moment of transition of human civilization and this point of the redefinition of money is probably the most significant opportunity that we have to change the path of human civilization. It's at the core of everything that represents power. And I think that we have a tremendous opportunity to step up and engage as humanity in redefining what could be best for all. And I want to see a raise of hands for everybody that does agree with me.
Sounds like a good idea to me. Thank you very much indeed, sir. Thank you. Just before we go to Michael Savant in the USA, I'd like to ask everybody to give some thought to a question. And the question is, how should we step up? So what does stepping up look like? What should we do in terms of focusing our energies and campaigning around this? Do we write to politicians? Do we protest outside the Bank of England and wave to Michael Kumoff as we do so? Well, what do we do? Give that some thought and perhaps share your ideas in a moment. But first of all, we're going to go to Michael in the USA. Michael, please do take the moment to share your thoughts, please, and also a little bit about your background and context. Michael Savant, thank you.
Okay, I'm the executive director of a nonprofit think tank in Youngstown, Ohio, that's been focused on the ideas of new forms of money, et cetera. And the one thing that I wanted to put on the table, based on my former mentee is considered one of the top gurus about disruptive innovation in the world, Clayton Christensen. He used to be an advisory board member to me, and that, you know, his key concepts, if you really get to know and understand them, generally a disruptive new market or new innovation, you know, that is replacing an existing system doesn't start at the top, it starts at the bottom. And so what we've been focused on is the idea of how citizens can establish new money systems on a regional basis locally that would not wind up being any kind of a threat to the existing infrastructures, whether it's the central bank or the banks, the larger banks, et cetera. And that it's also very much in the Bucky Fuller concept. You don't replace an existing paradigm by trying to do changes within it. Go create a new system parallel to it and then ultimately replace it. And so, you know, we'd like to get on the table the idea that I think more, you know, attention needs to be made to the idea of what can we citizens do now without waiting for the government or any other higher powers that be to be able to start solving our own problems. And we can do so if we essentially issue our own money.
And everyone's going to be wondering, Michael, how on earth do you do that? What on earth are you talking about? So could you give like a few sentences to explain what a regional or local currency is?
Well, essentially that, you know, anybody, you know, is capable of issuing money. In fact, you know, one of the chief references that we put out there is a article that was written by the Cleveland Federal Reserve about a decade ago about private money and how essentially anybody can create money. And you know, historically they have, going all the way back to the Egyptian days, et cetera. The key has been discussed a lot today with the advent of computers and the internet. It's much easier now to be able to issue a currency digitally rather than having to go print something on paper, et cetera. And so that's at the core of what we're working with. And there's a variety of systems out there that allow you to essentially establish a database, create accounts, just like a checking account, banks and so on, and, you know, issue money, which you can do in one of four ways. You can either sell it for an existing currency, which is the most common way that most local currencies do it, or invest it, lend it, or the key one that we think makes the huge difference is spend it into existence, like the monetary folks talk about when they talk about, you know, the sovereign entity should be able to just spend money into existence. We're looking at the same idea at the local level where, you know, we establish a project, we just simply create money on our computer system and spend it into existence.
Thank you very much indeed. Now, for those of you that don't know, the TCF currently has a complementary currencies group. So if the idea of regional currencies is of some interest to you, then please do let us know and we'll add you to that group. We're also going to be adding or creating another group within the TTF to basically house the interest that's being shown tonight. And I'll be asking Barry, of course, to play a leading part in helping to run that. Next, we're going to go...
Andy, if I may, one quick closing thing. I just put a link in there to an article we wrote where we explore where money, you know, is today and this whole alternative of private money.
Very good. Very good. Thank you very much indeed.
Could I just make a couple of quick comments on the foregoing?
Yeah.
The first one is, Michael, I think you already know, but I'm involved in local currency projects. They have huge potential from an ecological standpoint as well as other standpoints as well, and very, very supportive. And the design of every CBDC should take that into account and support it. And that should be part of its journey. On the point of quantum, I want to be really clear about this. No one's throwing it about lightly. You don't write a book of this stature and length throwing it about lightly. So anyone who thinks that, I would challenge you, please go and read the book and then let's talk. Because the Schrodinger's cat, I'll just very briefly explain how that applies. In classical economics, we're told there's a correct Platonic price for everything. But actually, you don't know the price of something until there's a transaction. And that's when the waveform collapses, for those who understand quantum. And it's a much better fit than the model we have. So he's not here to defend himself. I'm not defending him, but read the book and then let's talk.
Wonderful, Barry. Thank you very much indeed. We're going to go to Mr. Scott McIntyre next, then to Emmanuel. Mr. McIntyre, please introduce us and tell us where you are, because I'm curious where people are in the world. Scott, over to you.
Thank you, Andy, and thank you, Barry, for hosting. This is a wonderful discussion so far. I apologize only that I was a bit late. So I work with Mr. Savant at National Commonwealth Group. I'm also based in Ohio, but a different part of the state. And I wanted to more directly answer your question, Andy, which was how does a local currency or regional currency come into effect? And so I just returned from Latin America for a week, meeting with both dirt farmers and influencers at the government level, as well as corporations in the middle. And the easiest way to put it is the way that simply applied to the people that we're meeting with, especially the farmers, people that aren't really knowledgeable about the ecosystem that they're entering, is we simply want to bring them up to the standard of bankability. Whether or not they want to enter that debt credit system once they get to that level of bankability is another question. And hopefully, I would hope that they will avoid it. But by simply issuing the currency into a locale, for anything that's not imported from outside that economy, it's perfectly good tender. I don't need to have a US dollar in order to buy chickens from my neighbor, in order to have him paint my house, for et cetera. So that's really how we're doing it, is we're simply establishing a reasonable track record of performance as buyers and sellers and producers. So as the day that comes that they do want to enter the conventional economy, they'll have a transactional history and record of performance. So that's really our approach to doing so.
Thank you very much indeed. So that was a very clear message indeed. Wonderful. Let's go to Emmanuel. Your turn.
Sorry, just on mute. Just to follow the same mindset, brief comment about the late economist Bernard Lieta, that made the comment that right now we have a monoculture of currency in the world, and he was advocating the advent of having more resiliency into the system by introducing a multiplicity of currencies. And this is, I think, an approach that we tend not to think about. So even if there's introduction of CBDCs or different currencies into central banking, I think we do have to think about the regulatory framework necessary to be able to introduce, or for people, if we want to have a bottom-up structure, we need to think about the regulatory frameworks of nations to enable those introductions of different currencies.
Thank you very much indeed, Emmanuel. Thank you. On the topic of regional or complementary currencies, I'm going to share my screen again to explain to everybody that this spreadsheet is the TTF's event program. We are very, very busy, as you can see. And on the December the 2nd, Thursday, December the 2nd, at 6 o'clock UK time on Zoom, we have an event called Complementary Currencies for Building Back Better. It's all about the idea of complementary currencies helping to drive transformational, structural, systemic change in the ecosystem. So if that's of interest, let us know when my colleague Alexandra sends out a note to you all. Okay, very, very good. Who'd like to go next? Just raise your hand or wave something at me. We're going to go back to Michael Kumhoff. Lovely to hear from Michael again.
Yeah, we've had a lot of interventions now on complementary currencies. And I think there's a little danger here that this sidetracks the whole debate. I'm not saying that complementary currencies cannot be useful, but if you look at where they have actually popped up in history, it is very often after a catastrophic economic crisis. And so that's something we want to avoid in the first place. So saying that we need to go to complementary currencies, sure, as a complementary thing, but it's admitting defeat if we're saying, oh, we have to do that and we can't, because we can't solve the big systemic questions. So there's a danger that this sidetracks the debate. And at the end of the day, these local currencies have much lower economies of scale than a national currency, because the entity that issues them is going to have limited credit in the national domain. It's going to have local credit, yes, but not. It's often not going to be accepted nationwide, and certainly not internationally. And so you still need the national money, so do not forget the national money is what I'm saying.
Thank you very much indeed, Michael. Lovely. I get your point. So let's, we're going to squeeze in maybe one or two more before we start bringing matters to a close. Wave something at me if you'd like to say something. Mr. Steve Hubbard, you've been quiet all night long. I'm so pleased you've had a chance now to say what you'd like to say. Steve, over to you.
It's been a very good discussion. Thank you, Andy, and thank you for all the speakers. No, my point is just perhaps going back to what you said about what do we try and do about it. I think there are people here who have some very good and deep ideas and have been thinking about this for a long time. There are a vast number of the population who are not educated to that level and haven't studied economics to that level. And so I think the messages that we've got to get out have got to be simple to start with, for a simple audience, which is not meaning an unsophisticated audience in other ways, but in terms of money and the way it works. I mean, we've heard and taken for granted in a sense about the creation of money by banks, but that is an absolute mystery to vast numbers of people. If you bump into the next person if you speak to the next person you bump into and say, where does money come from? They won't say that. It's very unlikely that they'll understand that. And so that, I think the message has got to be from everybody, has got to be a simple one to start with. It'll obviously need developing, and we've got people here who do it and have done it very effectively. And the second thing is that because of that lack of simplicity, it's very easy to divide and rule. And I think that's what's happened. You've got, and we've heard tonight, we have positive money, we have Steve Keen's view, we've got the humane economics, and there are many, many other groups spread around. TTF is one of them in a sense, PBP, a vast number of groups, and divide and rule becomes very, very easy for the people in power to just simply ignore systems or to eliminate them one by one.
Thank you very much, Steve. As always, you provide valuable input. Thank you. Time for one more. I'm going to, in that case, invite Barry to make his final closing remarks before I wrap the session up. Mr. Barry James, over to you. And can we please once again thank Barry for the session, because he has put in a mountain of work to make this happen today. Well done, Barry. Much appreciated. We've all enjoyed it. We really have. And I've learned a great deal. Barry, what are your final thoughts and reflections on tonight's session?
So firstly, thank you for coming. It's been really helpful to me. My reflection on this evening is that I'm more certain than ever that we need to bring democracy into money for the sake of the planet and for the sake of us all. And we need to take back control. We need to make sure that it is the things that are decided are democratically decided, and we need to make sure there is governance, proper governance, sunlight and fresh air. So we need to find a way to create the new institutions, the new digital institutions that we need. And I'm delighted. Steve's absolutely right, by the way. We do need to find ways to communicate this. It's remained in the dark for so long because, you know, Positive Money had such an uphill struggle in trying to get this message across. They've been working on it for so long now, for 10 years. I salute them for this. And it's not that we're divided. It's that there hasn't been a unifying force. Hopefully, one of the ambitions that we have for humane economics is to be that broad, to help to us tackle those two issues that you mentioned, Steve, of trying to communicate the complex clearly in ways that people can understand better and the implications of them, but also being a broad church, able to put our arms around, and bring people together to purpose. The purpose being to start the process and cut to the heart of the issues that have put us in the predicament we're in, and can take us to a better place. Thank you.
Barry, thank you. Okay, it's been a very, excuse me, I've learned a great deal tonight. It's been great to hear so many alternative points of view. Let's give ourselves a collective round of applause for persisting with the debate and the discussion. It's been healthy, it's been civilized, it's been constructive. I salute you all for that. Thank you very much indeed. In terms of the process, probably tomorrow you'll get an email from my head of events, Alexandra, and we'll organise kind of next steps off the back of that. Thanks all very much indeed. Hope you have a good rest of your evening, day, afternoon, wherever you happen to be. Thank you and good night. Thank you.